Name. The usher didn't look up from his clipboard. He held the velvet rope across the entrance like a weapon, his thumb hovering over the laminated list of guests who actually mattered. Bridget Dunmore. He flipped a page, then another. The bass from the band inside thudded against my chest, a dull rhythmic pressure that matched the ache in my jaw. I had been grinding my teeth since I crossed the county line into Beaufort. The air smelled of jasmine and expensive perfume, but beneath it was the distinct briny scent of low tide. I knew that smell. I owned that smell. Bridget Kessler, I corrected. For today. Only for today. He stopped scrolling. Oh. He made a small noise, the kind you make when you find a stain on a white tablecloth. Right. Table 12. He unhooked the rope but didn't step back to let me pass. He just pointed toward the far corner of the tent, past the crystal centerpieces and the tiered cake, toward the swinging metal doors where the waiters disappeared. Back corner, near the kitchen. My fingers went instinctively to my right earlobe, touching the cold, smooth surface of the pearl earring. Frank gave them to me. The only thing in this entire zip code that didn't feel like a judgment. I walked past the usher. My heels crunched on the gravel loud in the sudden silence between songs, and I kept my chin parallel to the ground. I was the CEO of an $80 million logistics company. I controlled a fleet of 300 trucks. I had negotiated contracts that made grown men sweat through their custom suits. But in this tent, I was just the girl Frank Kessler brought home in a brown paper bag. The reception was a sea of white linen and navy blazers. I recognized half the faces from the local business journal and the other half from Judith's charity galas. They looked through me. That was the Kessler magic. If Judith didn't acknowledge you, you simply ceased to reflect light. I found table 12. It was wobbly. One leg was shorter than the others, propped up by a folded cocktail napkin. There was no centerpiece, just a generic candle and 3 empty chairs. I sat down, smoothing the fabric of my dress. It was navy, simple, expensive. It was armor. My phone buzzed in my clutch. Corinne. You don't have to do this. I didn't answer. I looked at the head table. It was elevated, literally sitting on a riser so the family could look down on their guests. Judith sat in the center. She was wearing champagne silk, her silver bob cut so sharp it could cut glass. She was laughing at something the groom's father said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. It was a performance. I knew exactly how much energy it took to maintain that posture, that smile, that illusion of effortless perfection. Then she stopped. Her eyes did that slow, terrifying scan of the room, like a lighthouse beam searching for a shipwreck. The beam hit table 12. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just stared, her face completely still, measuring me against the backdrop of the service doors. Then she lifted her chin a fraction of an inch. An acknowledgement number A directive. Stay there. I poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady. I made sure it was steady. A spoon tapped against a crystal glass. The sound cut through the chatter like a knife. Everyone, if I could have your attention. Paige stood up at the head table. My little sister, the bride. She looked like a princess in a $15,000 gown that I knew for a fact was paid for by the third-quarter profits of Kessler Seafood. Profits that came from my trucks, my drivers, my supply chain. She glowed under the string lights, blonde and bubbly, and everything Judith had ever wanted. Thank you all for coming, Paige said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. She held up her champagne flute. Today has been perfect, but we all know a wedding isn't just about 2 people. It's about families joining together. A murmur of agreement rippled through the tent. I looked at the lobster tail on the plate in front of me. It was untouched. I knew the harvest date. I knew the lot number. I knew the driver who had hauled it from the coast this morning. I knew the invoice number Judith hadn't paid yet. And I want to make a toast. Paige continued, her eyes glistening. To the people who made us who we are. To the bonds that can't be broken. To real family. The room went silent. To the people who share our blood, our name, and our table. Page finished. 150 glasses went up. 150 people murmured, "To the Kesslers." My glass stayed on the table. At the head table, Judith caught my eye again. She knew. She had to know what Paige just said. Real family. Blood. She looked at me and then she mouthed 2 words. Slowly. Distinctly. Stand up. She wanted me to toast to my own exclusion. She wanted me to drink to the biology that made me a ghost in my own life. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. Heads turned. I lifted my glass. The champagne was warm. I took a sip, and it tasted like salt water and ash. Dinner service ended and the band started playing Etta James. At last. The irony was thick enough to choke on. I picked up the small silver-wrapped box from the empty chair beside me. A crystal frame. A photo of us, Paige and me, back before she learned that loving me was a liability. I started the long walk to the head table. It felt like walking underwater. The air was heavy with the smell of garlic butter and heavy floral arrangements. Guests were leaning back in their chairs, laughing, full of the food I had delivered. I passed Troy's uncle, who was loosening his tie. I passed the mayor of Beaufort. I reached the platform. Judith saw me first. Her smile didn't drop, but it tightened at the corners. The temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Congratulations, Paige," I said. Paige turned. She blinked like she was surprised to see me there, standing on the edge of her spotlight. "Oh, thanks, Bridge." She took the box without looking at it. She set it down on the tablecloth behind a half-empty bottle of wine, pushing it out of sight. "Sorry," she said, turning back to Troy's mother. "We were just talking about the honeymoon." I stood there. I was a 44-year-old CEO. I had 120 employees who called me boss, and I was standing there like a child waiting for permission to speak. I turned to leave, but my eyes caught the empty chair at the end of the table. It was Frank's chair. There was a single white rose on the plate. I hesitated. I shouldn't have stopped. I should have just kept walking. But my feet moved on their own, stepping toward the empty seat, toward the only person who had ever looked at me and seen a daughter. "That's Frank's chair," Judith said. Her voice was low. Dangerous. The kind of tone you use to tell a dog to get off the furniture. "I know," I said. "I just thought, sweetheart." The word dripped with condescension. "This table is for family. You understand." The noise in the room seemed to fade away, leaving only the buzzing of the speakers and the pounding of my own heart. "I am family," I said. The words felt foreign in my mouth. Judith sighed. A small, impatient sound. She looked me up and down, scanning the dress, the shoes, the face I had worn for 41 years. "You know what I mean," she said softly. "Blood family." It wasn't anger. It was a fact. She stated it with the same casual certainty she would use to say the sky was blue or the grass was green. Paige looked up then. She saw the guests at the nearby tables watching. She saw the tension. And because she was the golden child, the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, she smiled. "There's the kitchen table, Bridge," she said, pointing with her fork. "Through the service door. You always liked it back there. It's quieter." 2 people at the end of the table laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was an oblivious laugh. They thought it was an inside joke. They thought it was funny, the kitchen table, the world tilted, just a little. I looked at the lobster on Paige's plate. Butter was pooling around the shell. 13 years, 17 million pounds of seafood, 16,000 delivery runs, 412 invoices, 63 crisis calls at 3 a.m. when a shipment ran late and Judith screamed at my COO that she would find a real supplier. I had built the infrastructure that kept this family rich. I had fed their empire. I had kept their plates full while they starved me. And they pointed me to the kitchen. "All right," I said. My voice sounded strange, calm, hollow. All right. I didn't look at Judith. I didn't look at Paige. I turned around and walked back to table 12. I picked up my clutch. I walked past the usher, past the velvet rope, past the white tent that glowed like a lantern in the darkness. I walked out into the night. The air in the parking lot was sharp and cold. It sucked the heat right out of my skin. My heels crunched on the gravel, a lonely, rhythmic sound. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I reached my Volvo. I didn't get in immediately. I stood there leaning against the door, staring up at the stars. They looked cold, distant, indifferent. Inside the tent, the band was playing a cover of a Motown song. People were dancing. Judith was probably holding court, telling the mayor how proud she was of the wedding, how perfect everything was. My hands weren't shaking. That was the strange part. I expected them to shake. Instead, they felt heavy, like stone. I opened my clutch. The light from the phone screen was blinding in the darkness. I scrolled to the contacts. Corinne Taggart. My thumb hovered over the name. If I pressed it, there was no going back. If I pressed it, the secret I had kept for 13 years would be over. The protection I had given them would be gone. This table is for family. I pressed the button. It rang once, twice. Bridge Corinne's voice was sharp, anxious. "How's the wedding?" "It's done," I said. There was a pause. She heard the flat tone in my voice. She knew that tone. "What happened?" "The kitchen," I said. "They told me to sit in the kitchen." Silence stretched over the line. I could hear the hum of Corinne's refrigerator in the background. I could hear her breathing. She had been waiting for this call for a decade. "What do you want me to do?" she asked quietly. I looked back at the tent. I could see the silhouettes of the dancers against the canvas walls. They looked like ghosts. "Kill the Kessler account," I said. "All 12 locations. All 12. Effective immediately. No grace period. No transfer. No referral to alternate vendors." "Bridget." Corinne hesitated. "That's a $4.2 million annual account. For us. I know what it costs. And the exclusive clause means I know what it means," I interrupted. "They can't source from anyone else for 90 days without breaching. They'll have no product by Wednesday." I waited. The crickets were screaming in the trees. "It's about damn time," Corinne whispered. "Send the termination notice Monday at 8 a.m., I said. "Have legal CC'd. Already drafting it in my head." I hung up. The screen went dark. The silence of the parking lot rushed back in heavy and absolute. I got into the car. The leather seat was freezing. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I should have felt something. Triumph, rage, grief. I felt nothing. Just the vast, empty clarity of a burning bridge. I started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the exit sign. By Monday morning, the coolers at all 12 Kessler seafood locations would be empty. The trucks wouldn't come. The lobsters wouldn't arrive. Judith would wake up to a quiet phone, and by noon, she would be screaming. She wanted me in the kitchen. Fine. I was going to close the kitchen down. Turn out like what? That was the question I asked, the steam rising from my coffee mug. It was Sunday morning. The sunlight was streaming through the bay windows of my kitchen in Charlotte, spilling across the granite countertops and the slate floor. It was a warm, golden light, the kind that usually made me feel settled. Anchored. Wade was at the stove. The smell of buttermilk pancake batter hitting a hot griddle filled the room, competing with the scent of brewing coffee. He was humming something low and off-key. His shoulders relaxed in a way mine never were. "You okay?" he asked without turning around. He flipped a pancake with a practiced flick of his wrist. I wrapped my hands tighter around the ceramic mug. The warmth seeped into my palms, but it didn't reach the cold spot in the center of my chest. She never specified, I said. Like this. If I had known she would turn out like this. What is this tall, quiet present? Wade set the spatula down. He turned and leaned against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell me I was imagining things. He just waited. I closed my eyes and suddenly I wasn't 44. I wasn't a CEO. I wasn't standing in my own paid-for kitchen in Charlotte. I was 14 years old. The memory didn't come back like a movie. It came back like a physical blow. It was Christmas Eve. The dining room in the big house in Beaufort was a shrine to Judith's taste. Crystal chandelier polished to a blinding shine. Garland made of real pine draped over the mantel, scenting the air with sap and winter. The table was set with the good china, the Lenox pattern with the gold rim that we were forbidden to touch. Judith was holding court. She sat at the head of the table, a glass of Chardonnay in her hand, flanked by her lieutenants, Carol Bancroft and Lorraine Peoples, women who wore pearls to the grocery store and spoke in a code I was still trying to decipher. 8-year-old Paige was on the floor, surrounded by wrapping paper and expensive toys. She was the golden centerpiece of the room, laughing blonde, perfect. I stood in the doorway. I was wearing a velvet dress that scratched my neck. In my hands, I held a ceramic platter. I had spent 3 hours in the kitchen baking sugar cookies. I had decorated them with royal icing, piping delicate snowflakes and holly leaves, trying to make them look like something from a bakery. Something worthy. I walked forward. The carpet swallowed the sound of my shoes. "Mother," I said. Judith stopped talking. She turned her head slowly, the movement languid and heavy with annoyance. Her eyes dropped to the plate in my hands. She didn't look at my face. She picked up one cookie, holding it by the edge as if it might be contaminated. Lorraine leaned forward, her lipstick bleeding slightly into the fine lines around her mouth. "Judith, you really are a saint," she said, her voice dripping with syrup. "Taking in a child like that. Most people wouldn't have the patience." Judith sighed. It was a long, tragic exhalation. She set the cookie back on the plate without taking a bite. "Well," she said. The word hung in the air. "Honestly, if I had known she would turn out like this, I wouldn't have signed those papers." Carol gasped a little, then covered it with a laugh. Lorraine chuckled. Paige looked up from her dolls, sensing the shift in the room, and smiled because everyone else was smiling. I stood there. The ceramic plate felt like it weighed 100 pounds. My hands started to tremble. Across the room, Frank was standing by the bar cart. My father. The man who had taught me to ride a bike. He was pouring a scotch. He froze when Judith spoke. I saw his face in the mirror above the sideboard. I saw the flash of pain, the shame, the anger. I waited for him to speak. I waited for him to say, "Judith, stop." I waited for him to say, "She is our daughter." Frank looked at me in the mirror. Then he looked down at his glass. He swirled the ice cubes and took a drink. He said nothing. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. It was the sound of a door slamming shut, locking me out forever. I turned around. I walked back into the hallway, past the towering Christmas tree, and pushed through the swinging door into the kitchen. I sat down at the small round table in the breakfast nook. I put the plate of cookies in the center. I picked one up and ate it. It tasted like dust. That kitchen table became my country. For the next 4 years, that was where I existed. Thanksgiving, Easter, birthdays. "The dining room is for family, sweetheart," Judith would say. She didn't say it with malice. She said it like she was explaining gravity. It was just a law of nature. I opened my eyes. The smell of pine and betrayal vanished, replaced by buttermilk and coffee. Wade was watching me. He knew. He knew the story. He knew why I had 2 different smiles, the real one, and the one I wore like a shield. "Do you want to reverse it?" Wade asked quietly. "You have until Monday morning. You can call Corinne and tell her to stand down." I looked at the framed print on the far wall of the kitchen. It was an abstract map of the Carolina coast. "I have been thinking about that," I said. I walked out of the kitchen and down the hall to my study. Wade followed his footsteps soft on the hardwood. My study was my sanctuary, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a large mahogany desk that faced the door, not the wall. On the wall behind the desk, framed in simple black wood, was the first invoice I ever sent. Tideline Coastal Distribution, $2,400, Wilmington, 2004. I walked over to it. I started with one refrigerated truck and a borrowed cooler in a warehouse that smelled like diesel, I said. I know, Wade said. He stood in the doorway, giving me space. I didn't plan to become their supplier, I said, tracing the edge of the frame. That happened because I was the best option. Because I built something good, something reliable. Corinne handled the Kessler account from day one. She was the face they saw. They never knew I existed behind the invoices. For 13 years, I said, turning to face him, I have fed every customer that walks into those 12 restaurants. Every shrimp cocktail, every lobster roll, every catch of the day. I made sure the trucks arrived before the prep cooks did. I made sure the cold chain never broke. My voice remained steady, but my hands were clenched at my sides. And the woman who runs that empire told me to sit in the kitchen. Wade walked into the room. He sat on the edge of the leather sofa, resting his elbows on his knees. Tell me about the contract, he said. He knew the contract. But he knew I needed to say the math out loud to make it real. 3 years ago, Judith demanded better pricing, I said. She squeezed us. She threatened to walk if we didn't drop our margins by 8%. Corinne negotiated. We gave her the pricing. But we added a clause. The exclusivity clause, Wade said. 90 days, I said. Kessler Seafood cannot purchase inventory from another vendor for 90 days after termination without facing a penalty of $1.8 million, plus legal fees, plus the cost of the breach. At the time, I hadn't thought about weaponizing it. It was just good business. It was leverage to ensure volume. Now it was a noose. I did the math in my head. I always did the math. Without Tideline, the first restaurants run out of fresh product by Wednesday. They can pull from frozen reserves, but that degrades the quality immediately. By Friday, they are 86ing half the menu. By next Monday, they have 12 restaurants with full payroll, rent, utilities, and zero revenue-generating product. Their burn rate is roughly $340,000 a week, I said. Judith has cash reserves, but she just leveraged a heavy line of credit to renovate the Charleston location. Wade nodded slowly. So, if she doesn't breach the contract, she bleeds out in 6 weeks, he said. If she breaches it to buy from someone else, she owes you nearly $2 million. She doesn't have liquid. And finding a new supplier who can handle that volume takes a month to onboard, I added. It was a perfect storm. I had engineered it piece by piece, invoice by invoice, without ever realizing I was building a bomb. Wade stood up. He walked over to me and placed his hands on my shoulders. His palms were warm. He was the only person in the world who saw the 14-year-old girl standing inside the CEO's suit. What do you want, Bridge? He asked. Not what do they deserve. Not what is fair. What do you want? I looked past him at the desk drawer where I kept the letter. The letter Frank wrote before he died. The one I found in the safe deposit box. The one I hadn't opened since the funeral. I want them to know I whispered. Know what I want them to know who set the table. Monday morning arrived with the gray industrial precision of a loading dock door sliding open. I parked my Volvo in the reserved spot at the Tideline headquarters. The building was a sprawling structure of glass and steel on the outskirts of Charlotte. It didn't look like a family business. It looked like a fortress. I walked through the warehouse floor on my way to the elevators. The air was cold, kept at a constant 38 degrees. It smelled of ozone and cardboard and the faint, clean scent of the ocean trapped in ice. Forklifts beeped in a chaotic symphony as they loaded the morning fleet. Men in insulated vests shouted coordinates. Pallets of blue crab and grouper moved like clockwork. This was mine. I didn't inherit it. I didn't marry into it. I built it out of nothing but grit and sleepless nights. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor. My office was at the end of the hall, a glass cube that overlooked the operation. Corinne was already there. She was wearing a lime green blazer and sneakers. Her curly hair pulled back in a hair tie that looked like it was about to snap. She held a manila folder in her hand as if it were a loaded gun. "Morning," she said. Her voice lacked its usual bounce. "Morning." I walked behind my desk and sat down. The leather chair creaked. I placed my phone on the desk, face down. Corinne sat opposite me. She slid the folder across the polished wood. "Termination notice," she said. "CC'd to their legal department. CC'd to their accounts payable. CC'd to Judith Kessler's personal email. All 12 locations listed by tax ID." I opened the folder. The letter was 1 page, short, brutal. "Pursuant to Section 4, Paragraph C, effective immediately. Services terminated. Last chance to change your mind," Corinne said. She was watching me closely. I looked through the glass wall down at the warehouse floor. I saw a driver loading a crate onto truck number 42. He was laughing with the dispatcher. Life was moving on. I thought about the wedding. I thought about the usher. I thought about the kitchen table. "Send it," I said. Corinne let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since Saturday night. "Girl," she said, a small, fierce smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "I have been waiting 13 years to press this button. Press it." She tapped the enter key on her laptop. Click. It was such a small sound. A tiny mechanical snap of plastic and metal. It didn't sound like an explosion. It didn't sound like the collapse of a legacy. But that was exactly what it was. 8:01 a.m. Somewhere in Beaufort, a notification pinged in the general inbox of Kessler Seafood. A receptionist would see it. She would frown. She would take a sip of her coffee. She would forward it to Denny, the operations manager. Denny wouldn't read it until 9. By then, the morning delivery truck that was supposed to arrive at the flagship restaurant would already be rerouted to a buyer in Savannah. The kitchen was closed. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked down at the empire I had built. Judith thought power was a head table. She thought power was exclusion. She thought power was making people feel small so she could feel big. She was wrong. Power wasn't who sat at the table. Power was who brought the food. And for the first time in 41 years, Judith Kessler was about to go hungry. It started with silence. For the first 2 hours after Corinne pressed send, the silence was absolute. It was the heavy, pressurized quiet of a hurricane holding its breath before landfall. I sat at my desk reviewing logistics reports for a grocery chain in Raleigh, but the words swam on the screen. My phone sat on the blotter, black and silent. Outside my glass walls, the warehouse hummed. Forklifts beeped. Pallets were wrapped in plastic. The world kept turning indifferent to the fact that I had just severed the aorta of the Kessler family legacy. Then, at 10:14 in the morning, the storm made landfall. My desk phone didn't ring. Corinne's did. I saw her through the glass partition that separated our offices. She picked up the receiver, listened for 5 seconds, and then looked directly at me. Her expression was unreadable. She didn't speak. She just held up one finger. "Wait." She listened for another minute. Then she hung up and walked into my office. "It's starting," she said. She didn't sit down. She paced her sneakers, squeaking faintly on the polished concrete floor. "That was a contact of mine in Beaufort," she said. "A delivery driver for a bread vendor who was parked at the loading dock of the flagship restaurant. The Kessler table. The crown jewel." And I asked. My voice was steady, but my pen was tapping a slow, rhythmic beat against the edge of the desk. Tap, tap, tap. "And the 11 a.m. seafood delivery didn't show," Corinne said. The head chef came out to the dock. He was screaming into his cell phone. Apparently, he called our customer service line and got the automated termination message. I pictured the chef. Marco. He had a temper that matched Judith's. He called Denny. Corinne continued. "And Denny called Judith." I leaned back in my chair. The leather creaked. "Judith called the main line," Corinne said. 4 times. 4 times. Each time she hit the automated system, Corinne said, a dark amusement coloring her tone. She couldn't get a human. She isn't used to not getting a human. On the 5th call, she left a voicemail. My assistant just forwarded the audio file to me. Play it. Corinne pulled her phone from her pocket. She tapped the screen and set it on the desk between us. For a moment, there was only the hiss of static. Then Judith's voice filled the room. It wasn't the voice she used at charity galas. It wasn't the voice she used for toasts. It was the voice she used when a waiter brought her the wrong wine, magnified by panic and rage. "Do you know who I am?" The recording crackled. "I am Judith Kessler. We have been your client for 13 years. This is a mistake. A massive, incompetent mistake. And someone is going to pay for it. I want a manager on the phone immediately. If this truck is not here in 20 minutes, I will sue you for every penny you have. You are nothing. Do you hear me? You are a worthless little nothing." The recording ended with the violent clatter of a receiver being slammed down. The silence returned, but now it felt different. It felt charged. Worthless little nothing. I picked up the pen. It was a heavy black Mont Blanc that Wade had given me when Tideline crossed 50 million in revenue. It felt cool and solid in my hand. She used the same vocabulary, I said softly. Corinne looked at me. What? When I was 16, I forgot to pick up her dry cleaning before the place closed. She looked at me and said, "You are a worthless little nothing." Same words, same cadence. I looked at the phone. "She doesn't know she's talking to me," I said. "She thinks she's yelling at a faceless vendor, but she's saying the exact same thing she said to the teenage girl she raised." Corinne picked up the phone and slipped it back into her pocket. "Well," she said, her voice hard. "That faceless vendor just cut off her supply. Let's see how loud she screams when the kitchen runs out of grouper." PM. By Tuesday, the dominoes were falling with the terrifying precision of a controlled demolition. I didn't leave the office. I sat in my glass tower surrounded by screens watching the reports roll in. It was a slow-motion car crash and I was the one driving the other car. 4 more restaurants reported empty deliveries. The panic in the Kessler corporate office was spreading like a virus. We knew this because Denny, the operations manager, sent an emergency procurement email to every distributor in the state. He was desperate. He was begging. But I had built the cage well. Corinne walked in on Wednesday afternoon with a tablet in her hand. "They are trying to source from Atlantic Foods," she said. "Denny just got a quote from them." I didn't look up from my laptop. Atlantic Foods was a competitor. They were bigger, slower, and more expensive. "They can't sign with Atlantic," I said. "They want to," Corinne said. "But Atlantic's legal team asked for their current vendor contracts as part of the due diligence. They saw the clause." I closed my laptop. The clause. The 90-day exclusivity agreement that Judith had signed 3 years ago to save 8% on shrimp prices. "Atlantic won't touch them," I said. "Not unless Judith pays the breach penalty." $1.8 million, Corinne recited. "Liquid. Up front." Judith didn't have it. I knew her books better than she did. She had tied up her cash in the renovation of the Charleston location, trying to make it look like a French bistro. She was leveraged to the hilt. "So they are stuck," Corinne said. She swiped a finger across the tablet. 3 restaurants closed today for lunch service. They put signs on the doors. "Closed for emergency maintenance." "Maintenance," I repeated. "Yelp disagrees," Corinne said. She turned the tablet toward me. I looked at the reviews flooding in for the Hilton Head location. 1 star. 1 star. 1 star. Went for the anniversary dinner. No lobster, no crab. Waiter said they were out of everything. Left and went to Applebee's. Management was screaming at staff in the open kitchen. Chaos. A void. Place looks abandoned. What happened? I watched the Kessler seafood rating drop from 4.2 stars to 3.5 in real time. It was digital bloodletting. "How long?" I asked. Corinne sat on the edge of my desk. "If they don't breach the clause, they burn through their frozen reserves by Friday. By Monday, they are serving salads and chicken fingers in a seafood restaurant. Revenue drops by 90%. Fixed costs stay the same. She paused, doing the mental math. They are insolvent in 5 weeks, maybe 6. I looked out the window at the parking lot. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the asphalt. I had built this company to feed people. That was the core of logistics. Getting sustenance from the source to the table. It was a noble profession. For 13 years, I had fed the Kessler empire. I had fixed their mistakes. I had rushed emergency shipments on Christmas Eve so Judith wouldn't be embarrassed. Now I was starving them. Is this who I am? The question whispered in the back of my mind. No. This is who they made me. Thursday morning brought rain and a new complication. Corinne closed the door to the conference room. She didn't have her usual caffeine-fueled energy. She looked serious. "We need to talk about Troy," she said. I looked up from my coffee. Troy Langley, Paige's new husband. The man with the perfect teeth and the firm handshake. The regional manager for Atlantic Coast Hospitality Group, I asked. The same Corinne said. She pulled out a chair and sat down. He knows people. He is in the industry. He isn't just a groom nodding along at dinner. He understands supply chains. So he is making calls, Corinne said. My contact at U.S. Foods said Troy called him personally this morning, asking questions. What kind of questions? Who is Tideline? Who runs it? Why did they drop a $4 million account overnight with zero notice? I felt a cold prickle of unease at the base of my neck. He is digging, Corinne said. He is looking for the name on the incorporation papers. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard. It was covered in shipping routes and volume projections. He will find it, I said. It is public record. Bridget C. Dunmore, founder and CEO. It's only a matter of time. Corinne agreed. She opened the thick folder she had brought with her. It wasn't the termination file. It was something else. Old. Battered. I looked at it. You know I keep notes on every client interaction, Corinne asked. You keep notes on everything. You document the coffee order. 13 years of notes on Kessler Seafood, she said. She placed her hand on the folder. Every late payment, every screaming phone call, every time Judith threatened to find a real supplier, every time Denny shorted a tip to my delivery drivers. Every abusive email. She pushed the folder toward me. It landed with a heavy, dull thud. If Troy finds out, she said, her voice low, then Judith finds out. And if Judith finds out, she will go to war. She won't just sue you. She will try to destroy you. I looked at the folder. It was a weapon, a dossier of cruelty recorded in black and white. If this goes public, Corinne said, meeting my eyes, I want them to see the receipts. I want them to know exactly why we pulled the plug. I didn't open the folder. I didn't need to read it. I had lived it. Troy is smart, I said. He won't just stop at the corporate filings. He will ask around. He will put the pieces together. Corinne nodded. He is calling people bridge, and sooner or later someone is going to answer. I looked at my reflection in the darkened glass of the conference room window. I looked calm, professional, detached. But my heart was hammering against my ribs. I had known this moment would come. I had known I couldn't hide behind the corporate veil forever. But I had hoped for more time. I had hoped to watch the collapse from a distance, anonymous and safe. Now the anonymity was dissolving. The invisible wall was coming down. Let him call, I said. My voice sounded braver than I felt. Let him find the name. Because once he found the name, there would be no more secrets. No more hiding in the kitchen. Judith would know. And she wasn't going to be looking for a supplier anymore. She would be looking for a daughter to blame. It took Troy Langley exactly 4 days to pull the loose thread that would unravel my entire life. I wasn't in the room when it happened, but I could picture it with the clarity of a high-definition security feed. I knew Troy. He was a man of systems and spreadsheets, the kind of person who checked the weather before he opened the blinds. He sat in his home office on Friday afternoon, surrounded by the neatly organized chaos of a hospitality manager's life. On his screen, the North Carolina Secretary of State website was glowing blue and white. He had spent the week asking around. He had called vendors. He had called competitors. And eventually, someone had pointed him to the public records. He typed in the search bar, Tideline Coastal Distribution. The results would have populated instantly. Corporate filings are not secrets. They are matters of public record available to anyone who bothers to look. Most people just never bothered. He would have seen the registered agent. He would have seen the incorporation date 2004, and then he would have scrolled down to the officers. Chief Executive Officer Bridget C. Dunmore. I imagined him staring at the screen. The name Dunmore meant nothing to the Kesslers. It was just a name I had married into a coat I had put on to cover the shivering girl underneath. But the C, the middle initial. Claire. He picked up his phone. He didn't call Judith. He called Denny. I knew this because Denny told Corinne and Corinne told me. The conversation was short. Denny Troy would have said, keeping his voice casual. What was Bridget's last name before she got married Kessler? Denny would have answered, sounding confused. Obviously, she was adopted. No Troy would have pressed. Her married name, the one she uses now. I don't know. Dunmore. Something like that. Why Troy wouldn't have answered the why. He would have hung up. He would have looked back at his computer screen where my name was listed as the owner of an $80 million company that had just cut his mother-in-law's throat. The thread was pulled. The knot was undone. That Friday night, the rain came down in sheets against the windows of my kitchen in Charlotte. It was a cold, driving rain, the kind that stripped the last of the autumn leaves from the trees. Inside the house was warm. Wade was at the stove. He wasn't cooking seafood. We didn't eat seafood in this house anymore. He was roasting a chicken, basting it with butter and rosemary. The smell was grounding, earthy. It smelled like safety. I sat at the island with a glass of red wine watching his hands. They were large, capable hands scarred from years of construction work. He moved with a quiet economy, chopping vegetables, checking the oven temperature. He didn't ask about the Kessler account. He didn't ask about the plummeting Yelp reviews or the panic in Beaufort. He just poured me more wine and slid a plate of food in front of me. Troy is going to find out, I said. I picked up my fork, but I didn't eat. I know, Wade said. He sat down opposite me. What happens then? Then Judith knows her adopted daughter built the company feeding her empire, he said. She will be furious, I said. She will be humiliated, Wade corrected. There is a difference. He was right. Fury was a fire Judith could control. She could direct it, shape it, use it to burn down anyone who opposed her. But humiliation was different. Humiliation was water. It seeped into the cracks. It rotted the foundation. Judith Kessler could survive a war. I wasn't sure she could survive being laughed at. Can I ask you something, Wade said. Always. When you married me, did you ever think I was a hiding place? Did you take my name just to disappear? I put my fork down. The rain lashed against the glass, a frantic rhythm against the quiet of the room. I looked at my husband. I saw the gray at his temples and the lines around his eyes. I saw the man who had held me while I cried after Frank's funeral, the man who had never once asked me to be anything other than exactly who I was. Bridge, he said softly. You didn't take my name to hide. You took it because theirs never fit. I felt a tightness in my throat, a pressure building behind my eyes. Dunmore. It was the name on my driver's license. The name on my degree. The name on the building I owned. It was the name of the woman who sat at this table in the center of the room, eating rosemary chicken with a man who loved her. This kitchen was home. This life was real. So why did I still hear Judith's voice every time I closed my eyes? Why was I still 14 years old, standing in a doorway, waiting for permission to exist? She adopted me when I was 3. Wade, I whispered. I don't remember anything before. She is my mother. That is what makes it unforgivable, he offered. Complicated. We cleared the plates in silence. Wade washed and I dried. It was a rhythm we had perfected over 8 years, a partnership. No one was in the kitchen because they were banished. We were there because we were hungry and because we fed each other. Dim. The weekend passed in a blur of anxiety. I checked my email every hour. I checked the news. I waited for the explosion. It didn't come on Saturday. It didn't come on Sunday. It came on Monday morning at 9:14. I was in my office at Tideline. The morning rush was over and the warehouse below was settling into its mid-morning hum. I was reviewing a contract for a new client in Raleigh, trying to focus on the numbers, trying to pretend that my world wasn't suspended over a precipice. My desk phone didn't ring. My cell phone buzzed. It was vibrating against the mahogany desk, a harsh, insistent sound. I looked at the screen. Mom. I stared at the word. I hadn't seen that caller ID in 13 months. Not since the Christmas I stopped trying. The letters seemed to pulse on the screen, a demand, a summons. Corinne was in her office next door. She saw me staring at the phone. She stood up, her face pale. She knew. I picked it up. My hand was cold. I swiped green. I put the phone to my ear. I didn't say hello. Is it true? Her voice wasn't loud. It was trembling. It was the sound of a violin string pulled so tight it was about to snap. Hello to you too, Judith, I said. Don't you dare, she hissed. Is it true? Are you? Tideline. I looked out the window. The sky was a brilliant hard blue. Yes. There was a silence on the line so profound I thought the call had dropped. 4 seconds. 5. You, she whispered. You have been our supplier for 13 years and you never told me. You never asked, I said. You never looked. You just signed the invoices and ate the lobster. This is sabotage, she said. Her voice was rising now, finding its footing in the familiar terrain of rage. This is revenge. You are trying to destroy this family because you are angry about a chair. It is not about the chair, Judith. Then what is it about? She demanded. I closed my eyes. I saw the Christmas tree. I saw the cookie plate. I saw the empty seat at the head table. It is about 30 years of kitchen tables, I said. You ungrateful little... The venom was back. The algorithm had reset. Step 1. Deny. Step 2. Attack. We raised you, she screamed. We gave you a home. I put clothes on your back and a roof over your head. I chose you from a system that didn't want you. And this is how you repay us. By trying to bankrupt the family that saved you. I gripped the phone so hard my fingers ached. Saved me. That was the story. That had always been the story. Judith the savior. Bridget the charity case. She didn't see a CEO. She didn't see a business partner. She saw a debt that could never be repaid. I hung up. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't defend myself. I just pressed the red button and ended the call. I sat there in the silence of my glass office. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. She knew. The secret was out. The weapon had been fired. And Judith Kessler wasn't scared anymore. She was at war. Corinne walked into my office on Monday afternoon carrying a cup of tea she didn't drink. She set it on a coaster, sat down, and looked at me with the expression of a bomb disposal technician who had just cut the red wire. It is happening, she said. I didn't have to ask what it was. The entire eastern seaboard of the Kessler supply chain was seizing up. My source in their admin office just texted, Corinne said. Judith called an emergency all-hands meeting at corporate, mandatory attendance. Even the restaurant managers had to dial in. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling tiles. I could picture the conference room in Beaufort perfectly. It had a long mahogany table that Judith polished with the same devotion she gave her silver. The walls were lined with framed awards. Best Seafood 2018. Restaurateur of the Year. Corinne looked at her phone, reading the play-by-play. Judith told them, Corinne said softly. She stood at the head of the table and told the entire family that Bridget Dunmore is Tideline. She told them, you have been the exclusive supplier for 13 years. And Denny dropped his coffee mug, Corinne said. Actually dropped it, shattered on the floor. He kept saying, but she is the sister, over and over again. I felt a cold, grim satisfaction settle in my chest. Denny. The man who had once asked me to move my car so a client could park in the driveway during Thanksgiving. And Paige? I asked. Corinne scrolled down. Paige denied it. She told the room it was impossible. She said, and I quote, she can't have built a company that big. She is just Bridget. Just Bridget. The words didn't hurt. They just confirmed the diagnosis. To Paige, I wasn't a person with ambition or capability. I was a supporting character. I was the extra in the movie of her life, the one who didn't have lines, just reactions. Then Troy spoke up. Corinne said. I looked at her. Troy hadn't said a word to me since the wedding. Troy looked at Paige and said, she is what Paige. And when Paige stuttered, he answered for her. He said Bridget graduated valedictorian. She got a full ride to Chapel Hill and an MBA from Duke. She is the only person in this room who knows how to read a P&L statement without moving her lips. I closed my eyes. Judith didn't fire him. Corinne shook her head. Judith didn't say a word. She just sat there shaking. The image of Judith Kessler shaking was harder to process than the bankruptcy reports. Judith was granite. She was marble. She didn't shake. They know I said to the empty room. They know Corinne agreed. And now the lawyers get involved. The legal threat arrived on Tuesday morning via courier. It was a thick envelope on heavy cream-colored bond paper, the kind that cost more per sheet than most people spent on lunch. I sat in my office with our general counsel, a man named Harrison, who wore bow ties and argued with the lethal precision of a surgeon. He had the letter spread out on my desk. Breach of implied good faith, Harrison said, adjusting his glasses. Tortious interference with business relations. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. He took a sip of water. It is a kitchen sink letter, Bridget. They are throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. Does any of it stick, I asked. Legally, no. The contract is clear. Section 4 allows termination without cause effective immediately. You are within your rights. The emotional distress claim is laughable in a B2B contract dispute. But they are desperate, Harrison said. And desperate people make expensive noises. They are demanding immediate reinstatement of the supply chain. No, I said. Then they are demanding you release the exclusivity clause. I looked at the contract terms highlighted in yellow on Harrison's legal pad. The clause. The 90-day lock. The cage I had built. If I release the clause, they can go to Atlantic Foods tomorrow, I said. They survive. Harrison nodded. If you enforce the clause, they are contractually barred from purchasing seafood from any other vendor for 90 days. If they do, they owe a penalty of $1.8 million. They don't have $1.8 million, I said. Harrison leaned forward. His voice dropped, shifting from legal counsel to strategist. That is the point, Bridget. They are a distressed asset. Their cash flow is negative, their credit is frozen, their primary supply chain is severed. He paused, letting the silence fill the room. You have 3 options. 1, you do nothing. You let the clock run. They bleed out for 90 days, breach the contract out of desperation, and you sue them for the penalty they can't pay. They file. Chapter 11 Bankruptcy. The banks take the restaurants. I stared at the map on my wall. 12 red pins marking the Kessler locations. Option 2. Harrison continued. You settle. They pay a severance fee, maybe $200,000. You release the clause. They limp along with a new supplier. And option 3. Harrison took off his glasses and cleaned them with a handkerchief. Option 3 is you buy them. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Buy them? Corinne asked from the corner where she had been quietly taking notes. They are in free fall, Harrison said calmly. If they can't operate for 6 weeks, their property values drop. Their brand devalues. Their staff leaves. A strategic buyer could acquire the entire 12-location chain for pennies on the dollar. You assume the debt, you take the assets, and you own the brand. I stood up and walked to the window. The warehouse below was moving at its usual frantic pace. Trucks coming in. Trucks going out. I would own the restaurants, I said. You would own the table, Corinne whispered. The table. The phrase Judith used like a weapon. This table is for family. If I bought them, I wouldn't just be sitting at the table. I would be the table. I would own the chairs. I would own the silverware. I would own the building. I could fire Judith. I could evict her from her own office. I could turn the flagship restaurant into a parking lot if I wanted to. It was the ultimate victory. It was the ending the 14-year-old girl in the kitchen had dreamed of. Draft the offer, I said. Harrison nodded and began packing his briefcase. Lowball it, I added. Distressed asset pricing. Harrison smiled a thin, shark-like expression. I will have the paperwork ready by Friday. He left. Corinne stayed. She walked over to the mini fridge in the corner and pulled out a bottle of champagne we had been saving for the holiday party. She popped the cork. It hit the ceiling tile with a sharp crack. 13 years bridge, she said, pouring the wine into 2 coffee mugs. 13 years you fed that woman's ego on a silver platter. Now she is eating crow. We clinked mugs. The champagne was cold and bubbly. It tasted like victory. But that night, I lay awake in bed. The house was quiet. Wade was breathing steadily beside me, his arm thrown over his eyes. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:14 a.m. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the offer letter Harrison was drafting. Acquisition of assets. Transfer of control. I thought about Judith walking into her office and finding me sitting in her chair. I thought about the look on her face. It should have felt good. It should have felt like justice. But instead, I felt a heavy, cold weight in my stomach. We raised you, Judith had screamed on the phone. I rolled over, pulling the duvet up to my chin. Buying the company was a business move. It was logical. It was efficient. So why did it feel like I was just trying to buy a different version of the same rejection Tauntsagsag? The phone rang on Wednesday evening. I was in the living room trying to read a book I had read 3 times before. Wade was in the shower. The house smelled of rain and cedar. I picked up my phone. It wasn't Judith. Paige. I stared at the screen. Paige hadn't called me since her birthday 4 months ago. She usually texted. Bright, emoji-filled texts that demanded nothing and gave nothing. I answered. Bridge. Her voice was tight. I could hear traffic in the background. She was driving. Paige, I said. Why are you doing this? No preamble. No hello. Just the accusation. You told me to sit in the kitchen at your wedding, I said. That was a joke, Paige cried. Her voice cracked. It was just a joke, Bridge. God, you have always been so sensitive. You take everything so seriously. Was it a joke, I asked, when you pointed to the service door? When Judith told me the head table was for real family, was that the punchline? Silence. The hum of tires on asphalt. Okay, maybe it wasn't a joke. Paige admitted, her voice dropping. But destroying Mom's business. 12 restaurants. Bridget. People are losing their jobs. The dishwasher at the Hilton Head location has 3 kids. The prep cook in Charleston has a mortgage. I closed my book. I set it on the table. I know, I said. I know exactly who they are. I know the dishwasher's name is Mateo. I know the prep cook is Sarah. I know this because I have been delivering food to them for 13 years. I know this because when Judith refused to pay overtime last Christmas, I covered the difference out of my own pocket and buried it in a credit memo so she wouldn't notice. Paige didn't say anything. "Do not talk to me about the employees, Paige," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Your mother has underpaid and overworked those people for decades. I am the only reason that business stayed afloat this long." "This isn't about employees," Paige said. "This is about you being petty. Petty. You are hurting her because you can." Paige said, "You have always been jealous. You have always wanted what we have." I laughed. It was a harsh, dry sound that hurt my throat. Jealous I built an $80 million logistics company from scratch while you were posting brunch photos on Instagram. "I don't want your life, Paige. I never did. I just wanted a sister." The line went quiet for a long time. I could hear Paige's turn signal clicking. Click. 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 "Mom is scared, Bridge." The words stopped me. Judith Kessler. Scared. "She won't say it," Paige whispered. "She is putting on the suit and the pearls and going to the office every day. She is yelling at the lawyers." But I saw her this morning. She was staring at the wall in the conference room. Just staring. I gripped the phone. "She thinks she is going to lose everything Paige said." "She is," I said. Paige let out a sob. A real one. "Please, Bridge. Just, please." I hung up. I sat in the dark living room. The rain tapped against the glass. Judith was scared. For 41 years, Judith had been the scariest thing in my world. She was the arbiter of worth, the gatekeeper of love. She was invincible. And now she was sitting in a conference room staring at a wall, terrified of the daughter she had thrown away. I should have felt triumphant. I walked to the window and looked out at the wet street. Judith was scared. But Judith didn't do scared. Judith did war. And if she was backed into a corner, she wouldn't beg. She wouldn't apologize. She would find a weapon. And she knew exactly where all my bruises were. Thursday morning did not start with a phone call. It started with the sound of a breach. I was in my office reviewing the acquisition offer Harrison had drafted when the noise cut through the ambient hum of the warehouse below. It was a sharp, rhythmic clicking, the sound of hard leather soles striking polished concrete. It wasn't the scuff of sneakers or the heavy thud of work boots. It was the sound of authority. I looked up. Through the glass wall of my office, I saw heads turning in the bullpen. My logistics coordinator, a young man who usually didn't look up from his monitors during a crisis, was staring at the lobby entrance with his mouth slightly open. Judith Kessler was walking across the Tideline floor. She was wearing full armor, a cream-colored Chanel suit that cost more than my first car, a triple strand of pearls that caught the harsh fluorescent light. Her sunglasses were pushed up into her hair, holding back the silver bob that hadn't moved a millimeter in 20 years. She didn't look like a woman whose business was hemorrhaging cash. She looked like she was arriving for a board meeting she intended to chair. But I knew the signs. I knew the tightness around her mouth. I knew the way her hands gripped her alligator skin handbag, the knuckles white beneath the skin. She marched past the reception desk. "Ma'am," the receptionist called out, standing up. "Ma'am, you can't just go back there." "Do you have an appointment?" Judith didn't break stride. She didn't even look at the girl. "I am her mother," she announced. The words echoed in the open space. "I am her mother." Corinne stepped out of her office. She moved fast, positioning herself between Judith and my door. Corinne was wearing jeans and a blazer, and she looked like a bouncer at a dive bar compared to Judith's country club polish. "Judith," Corinne said. Her voice was level professional but cold as ice. "You need to stop right there." Judith stopped. She looked at Corinne. For 13 years they had spoken on the phone. They had discussed invoices, delivery schedules, and menu changes. Judith had treated Corinne like a servant. Now she looked at her like a traitor. "You knew," Judith hissed. The venom in her voice was palpable. "You knew the whole time. You knew she was my daughter and you helped her." "I helped her build a successful business," Corinne said, not backing down. "What you did with your relationship was your choice." I opened my office door. "Let her in, Corinne." Corinne looked back at me, her eyes wide with warning. "Don't do it." "It is okay," I said. Corinne stepped aside. Judith walked into my office. The scent of Chanel No. 5 hit me before she did. It was a smell that triggered a Pavlovian response in my body. My stomach tightened. My shoulders rose. It was the smell of Sunday mornings before church, the smell of criticism, the smell of being inspected and found wanting. She closed the door behind her. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot. She stood in the center of the room and looked around. She looked at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the warehouse. She looked at the framed awards from the Chamber of Commerce. She looked at the photograph of Wade and me on my desk. She looked at the framed invoice from 2004. "This is..." She gestured vaguely, her hand trembling. "This is real." "Did you think it wasn't?" I asked. I stayed behind my desk. It was my territory, my barrier. She turned to face me. The mask slipped for a second, revealing something raw and terrified underneath, before she plastered it back in place. "I want you to reinstate our supply," she said. "Immediately." "No. I will sue you, Bridget. I will sue you for every dime you have made off my name." "You will lose," I said. "Read the contract, Judith, or have your lawyer read it to you again. Then release the exclusivity clause. That costs $1.8 million. Her jaw worked. She took a step toward the desk. "You are trying to bankrupt me." "No, Judith. I am trying to leave. That is all I have ever done. Leave." "But you built your empire on my supply chain without knowing it. So when I leave, the empire leaves with me." She stared at me. She looked at the woman in the CEO chair, and I could see her trying to reconcile me with the silent teenager she used to ignore at the dinner table. She couldn't do it. The cognitive dissonance was breaking her. So she reached for the only weapon she had left. The weapon that had worked for 41 years. She softened. Her shoulders dropped. Her eyes filled with a sudden glistening moisture. "Bridget," she said. Her voice dropped an octave, becoming the warm, honeyed tone she used when she wanted something. "I raised you." I didn't speak. I let the words hang in the air-conditioned silence. "I fed you," she continued, taking a step closer. "I put clothes on your back. I put a roof over your head. I chose you. Do you understand that I went into a system full of unwanted children and I chose you? I signed the papers. I took responsibility. I felt a crack in my chest. A hairline fracture in the armor I had spent 2 weeks building. You chose a tax deduction," I said. My voice was flat. "You chose a reputation boost. You wanted to look like a saint to the ladies at the club." "That is cruel," she whispered. "Cruel." I stood up. My hands were shaking, so I pressed them flat against the desk. "You told your friends you wished you had never signed the papers. I was 14 years old, Judith. I was standing right there with a plate of cookies. And you said, if you had known I would turn out like this, you would have left me there." Judith blinked, her brow furrowed. There was no flash of recognition, no guilt, just genuine confusion. "I don't recall that," she said. I stared at her. She didn't remember. The moment that had defined my entire adolescence, the ghost wound that had driven me to build an $80 million company just to prove I was worthy of existence, she didn't even remember it. It was just a Tuesday to her. "I know you don't," I said. "That is the problem. Get out of my office." She stiffened. The softness vanished, replaced by the granite hardness of the matriarch. "You will regret this," she said. "You think you are powerful because you have trucks and contracts? You have no idea what power is." She turned and walked out. She marched past Corinne, past the staring employees, and out the front door. She didn't look back. I sat down. My legs gave out. I put my head in my hands and breathed in the lingering scent of her perfume, trying not to be sick. Timed. The legal maneuvering began on Friday, but it was just noise. Harrison called me in the afternoon. Their attorney filed a motion, he said, sounding bored. Breach of fiduciary duty. They are claiming that your personal relationship with the family created an implied obligation to protect their business interests. It is ridiculous, I said. It is a stretch, Harrison agreed. It won't hold up in court. But they are also hinting at a defamation suit if you go public with the reason for the termination. Let them hint. It will cost time, Bridget. Depositions. Discovery. They will drag you into a room and make you talk about your childhood for 8 hours a day. I looked at the acquisition offer on my desk. Keep pushing, I said. They are bluffing. I thought the law was her weapon. I thought she would try to beat me in court. I was wrong. Judith knew she couldn't win in a courtroom where evidence mattered. So she took the fight to a venue where facts were optional and emotion was currency. She went to the court of public opinion. It happened over the weekend. I was in my garden pulling weeds with a violence that startled me. The earth was cold and damp. I was trying to get the smell of Chanel No. 5 out of my sensory memory. My phone rang inside the house. I ignored it. It rang again. And again. I wiped my dirty hands on my jeans and walked into the kitchen. It was Corinne. Have you seen Facebook? She asked. No, hello, no preamble. I don't use Facebook, I said. I poured a glass of water. Start, she said. Judith went nuclear. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I typed Kessler Seafood into the search bar. The official page popped up. The top post had been up for 3 hours. It had 4,000 shares. I stared at the image. It was a photo of Judith standing in front of the closed flagship restaurant. She wasn't wearing her armor. She was wearing a simple cardigan. Her hair was slightly mussed. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. She was surrounded by employees, Mateo, the dishwasher, Sarah, the prep cook, Denny, looking grim. Judith had her hand on Mateo's shoulder. She was crying. Tears were streaming down her face. Actual tears. I read the caption. To our beloved community it began. For 40 years our family has served yours. We have celebrated your birthdays, your anniversaries, and your milestones. Today we are fighting for our survival. We are facing a threat we never imagined, a betrayal from within our own family. We are being targeted by a supplier who is trying to destroy our legacy out of personal spite. We are fighting to save the jobs of the people in this photo. We are fighting to keep our table open for you. I scrolled down. The comments were a waterfall of outrage. I can't believe a daughter could do this to her own mother. That poor woman. She looks broken. I heard the daughter was adopted. After Judith gave her everything, ungrateful. Boycott Tideline. Who is the daughter? Name her. I felt the blood drain from my face. She is crying, I whispered into the phone. She hasn't cried since Frank's funeral. She is performing, Corinne said, her voice hard. She is telling a story, Bridge. And she got to the microphone first. I clicked on a shared post from the Beaufort Gazette. The headline read, Local Icon Faces Closure Amidst Family Feud. The article didn't mention the exclusivity clause. It didn't mention the unpaid overtime or the verbal abuse. It framed the narrative perfectly. The selfless matriarch versus the vindictive wealthy daughter. They think I am the villain, I said. Because she told them you are, Corinne said. She weaponized the adoption bridge. She is using the fact that she saved you to make you look like a monster for fighting back. I closed the laptop. The screen went black, but the image of Judith's tear-stained face burned behind my eyelids. She had done it. She had found the one thing I couldn't buy, couldn't negotiate, and couldn't contract my way out of. She had turned my invisibility against me. By hiding behind Tideline, by never claiming my success publicly, I had given her a blank canvas, and she had painted a masterpiece of victimhood. Bye, Segun. That night, the house felt too big. The silence felt heavy. It was Saturday. The rain had returned, tapping a relentless code against the windows. I sat on the sofa in the dark. My laptop was open on the coffee table, casting a sickly blue glow across the room. I was scrolling. I couldn't stop. My cousin works at Kessler's. He said the daughter thinks she is better than everyone else. Imagine biting the hand that fed you. Shameful. Some people just have bad blood. Bad blood. My phone buzzed on the cushion beside me. It was a reporter from the Charlotte Observer. It was the 14th call from a number I didn't recognize. I looked at the screen. My PR manager had sent me an email an hour ago. We are getting inquiries. Clients are asking if the instability is going to affect their shipments. We need a statement. A statement. What could I say? She told me to sit in the kitchen. It sounded petty. It sounded childish against the backdrop of 400 lost jobs and a weeping mother. Wade walked into the room. He had fallen asleep, waiting for me to come to bed. He was wearing a t-shirt and boxers, his hair messy. "Bridge," he said softly. He saw the laptop. He saw the tears I hadn't let fall. "She made me the villain, Wade," I said. My voice broke. He sat down beside me and pulled me into him. He smelled of sleep and soap. "She told them I am punishing her for loving me," I whispered. "She told them she saved me. And they believe her because she cried on camera and I just sent an email." "You know the truth," Wade said into my hair. "Nobody else does. Corinne does. I do." "That is 3 people," I said, pulling away to look at him. "That is 3 people against a whole town. Against the whole world." I looked at the legal papers stacked on the coffee table, the acquisition offer, the strategy to buy the table. It didn't matter. I could own the building. I could own the brand. I could put my name on the deed. But Judith owned the story. She always had. "I chose you. I saved you. You are difficult. You are ungrateful." She had written the script of my life before I even learned to speak. And now she was writing the ending. I stood up and walked to the window. My reflection ghosted against the glass superimposed over the wet street outside. I wasn't a CEO. I wasn't a victor. I was just the girl from nowhere trying to burn down the house because I was never invited inside. And for the first time since I made the call in the parking lot, I wondered if they were right. 2 a.m. The time on the digital clock in my study was a harsh red accusation in the darkness. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a silence so absolute it made my own heartbeat sound like a drum in my ears. I sat at my desk, surrounded by the debris of a war I was losing. Harrison's acquisition offer lay in a pool of light from the single brass desk lamp. Beside it were the printouts of the PR strategy Corinne had drafted. Control the narrative she had written in red marker. Shift the focus to business competence. I looked at the papers. They didn't look like strategy anymore. They looked like desperate scribbles from a child trying to convince the teacher she hadn't cheated on the test. My hand went to my ear. I touched the pearl earring on the right, then the left. They were warm from my skin, smooth and perfectly spherical. Frank had given them to me 26 years ago. He had slipped them into my hand while Judith was in the other room complaining about the humidity. "I am proud of you, kiddo." I closed my fingers over the pearls. What was I doing? I had built an $80 million company to prove I was worth something. I had bought a seat at the table with invoices and logistics. I had tried to force them to see me, but they couldn't see me. They had never seen me. I looked at the bottom drawer of my desk. It was locked. It had been locked since the day I moved into this house. I opened the top drawer, felt around the back for the small silver key, and unlocked the bottom cabinet. It smelled of old paper and cedar. There was only one thing inside, a thick, cream-colored envelope. I had found it in Frank's safe deposit box 3 days after his funeral. The lawyer had handed me the box key, looking confused, saying Frank had left specific instructions that I was to open it alone. I had read it once in the bank vault, crying so hard I couldn't breathe. Then I had sealed it, locked it away, and built a fortress around the memory. I hadn't wanted to look at it. It hurt too much. It was evidence of the only love I had ever received in that house, a love that had been silent, secret, and terrified. I pulled the envelope out. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges. Bridget was written on the front in Frank's architect script. Precise. All caps. I slid my finger under the flap. The paper tore with a soft ripping sound that seemed deafening in the quiet room. I pulled out the single sheet of stationery. I smoothed it out on the desk, right on top of the acquisition contract. Bridget, I found this stationery in the safe deposit box we never told you about. Your mother Judith does not know I am writing this, and she will be angry if she finds out. That has been the theme of our marriage. Things I should have said but did not to avoid her anger. You were 3 years old when we brought you home. You had a brown paper bag with 2 shirts, a stuffed rabbit with 1 eye, and a social worker's report that said you were quiet but observant. I read that report 17 times on the drive home. I was terrified. You are my daughter. I need you to hear that from me because I know Judith has made sure you never felt it. I watched her push you to the kitchen, to the back seat, to the margins. I watched and I did nothing. And that is the thing I am most ashamed of in my life. You were never a transaction. You were never a tax deduction. You were never a reputation boost. You were my daughter on the day I signed those papers, and you are my daughter now. I am sorry I never said it loud enough. Dad. I stared at the signature. Dad. The word blurred. A drop of water hit the paper, dark and round, right next to the ink. Then another. I wasn't sobbing. My body was completely still. But the tears were falling with a steady, relentless gravity. For 41 years I had followed the rules. I called him Frank. I called her Judith or Mother, never Mom unless I slipped. He is not your real father, sweetheart, Judith would say. And Frank would look at his shoes and pour another scotch. But he had written it down. When it mattered. When he knew he was running out of time. You were never a transaction. I read the line again. And again. I looked at the legal papers on my desk. The hostile takeover. The plan to buy the restaurants. The plan to force Judith to acknowledge me by owning the very ground she stood on. I realized then with a clarity that was colder and sharper than the pearls in my hand that I was still doing it. I was still the 14-year-old girl baking cookies, hoping that if I made them perfect enough, Judith would eat one. I was trying to buy the dining room so I could invite myself to sit in it. But the man who mattered had already invited me. He had invited me 20 years ago. He had loved me. He had been weak, yes. He had been an enabler. But he had loved me. I touched the pearls at my ears. I didn't need to buy the empire. I didn't need to force Judith to say my name. I didn't need to win the war for public opinion. I just needed to tell the truth. And then I needed to leave. Not run away, not hide. Leave. I folded the letter. I put it back in the envelope. I didn't lock it in the drawer this time. I placed it on top of the desk next to my laptop. I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt different, lighter. The heavy, suffocating pressure of the last 2 weeks had lifted, replaced by a strange, quiet emptiness. It wasn't happiness. It was peace. I turned off the lamp. Sunday morning broke with a pale, washed-out sunlight that filtered through the blinds of the kitchen. When Wade walked in, I was already sitting at the table. I had showered. I was wearing a clean white blouse and jeans. I had made coffee, and the pot was sitting on a trivet in the center of the table. Beside the coffee pot was a neat stack of papers. Wade stopped in the doorway. He looked at me, really looked at me, scanning for the cracked edges he had seen last night. "You look different," he said. "I feel different," I said. He walked over and poured a mug of coffee. He sat down opposite me. "What changed?" I slid the envelope across the table. "Read it." Wade took the letter. He read it slowly, his eyes tracking every line. When he finished, he set it down with a reverence usually reserved for religious texts. "Frank," he said softly. "Dad," I corrected. Wade smiled. It was a small, sad smile that reached his eyes. Dad. The back door opened and Corinne walked in without knocking. She looked like she hadn't slept. She was carrying a bakery box and a legal pad, and she had the frantic energy of a general losing a front. "I got your text," she said, dropping the box on the counter. 6 a.m. Bridget. Seriously, I assumed we were either filing for bankruptcy or launching a missile strike. She pulled out a chair and sat down, vibrating with caffeine. So the PR strategy, she started clicking a pen. I was thinking we pivot. We stop defending the termination and start attacking the financial mismanagement. We leak the balance sheets. We show that Judith was running the business into the ground long before we Corinne, I said. She stopped. She looked at me. She looked at Wade. She saw the calm, what she asked. "If you say we are dropping the whole thing, I will scream. We are not dropping it," I said. "We are changing it." "Okay," she said slowly. Changing it how I tapped the stack of papers on the table. It was the acquisition offer Harrison had drafted, the one that would give me ownership of Kessler Seafood. "I am not buying the restaurants," I said. Corinne blinked. "Excuse me, I am not buying them. I am not taking the empire. I am not evicting Judith." Corinne stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed. "Bridget," she said. "This is a $50 million asset. We have them by the throat. Harrison said they will sign anything we put in front of them just to stop the bleeding. I know." "So why?" "Because I don't want it," I said. "I don't want to be their landlord. I don't want to be their boss. I don't want to be connected to them by a single legal thread." I picked up the acquisition offer and dropped it into the recycling bin next to the island. "I am going to tell the truth," I said. "All of it. I am going to release a statement explaining exactly who I am and why I did this. I am going to release the client records you kept for 13 years. Corinne's eyes widened. "The receipts?" "The receipts," I confirmed. "Not to destroy them, just to show the pattern, to show that this wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was a 13-year abusive relationship." And then Corinne asked, "And then I am going to release the exclusivity clause." The room went silent. Wade looked at me surprised. "You are going to let them off the hook?" he asked. I nodded. "Effective immediately. No penalty. They can call Atlantic Foods tomorrow. They can rebuild their supply chain. They can save the restaurants." Corinne looked horrified. "You are giving up your leverage," she said. "You are giving them back their business." "No," I said. "I am giving them back their problems." I stood up and poured myself more coffee. "If I buy the company, Corinne, I have to fix it. I have to deal with Judith. I have to be in her life. I have to sit at that table forever." I took a sip. "I am going to give them back their empire," I said. "And I am going to take back my name." Corinne looked at the recycling bin where the contract lay. She looked at the letter from Frank on the table. She looked at me. She let out a long breath and capped her pen. "Walk away from a $50 million opportunity," she muttered. I looked at Wade. He reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was solid, warm. "Walk away from Judith," I said. I squeezed Wade's hand. "That is worth more than $50 million. Corinne sat back in her chair. She looked at the bakery box, then at me. A slow grin spread across her face. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She picked up her phone. "Harrison is going to have a stroke," she said. "But I like it. It is cleaner." "It is final," I said. Corinne tapped her screen. "I will set up a meeting," she said. "Neutral ground. Wednesday. Make it Wednesday. One last meeting. One last table. One last chance for Judith Kessler to see the daughter she threw away before I disappeared for good." The conference room at the Hilton in Columbia was a study in aggressive neutrality. The walls were beige. The carpet was a darker industrial beige. The air conditioning hummed with a persistent low-frequency drone that seemed designed to suck the emotion out of the air. It smelled of lemon pledge and stale coffee from a previous meeting. I arrived first. I sat at the end of the oval table, placing my hands flat on the faux wood surface. Corinne sat to my right, her usual nervous energy replaced by a solemn stillness. Beside her, Harrison arranged his legal files in neat stacks, though I had told him he wouldn't need them. At 2:00 exactly, the door opened. Judith walked in. She was wearing the armor I expected. A navy St. John knit suit with gold buttons. Her hair was perfect. Her pearls were luminous. But the armor had cracks. There were bags under her eyes that even her heavy concealer couldn't hide. Her posture, usually rigid as a steel beam, held a subtle curve of exhaustion. Paige followed her, looking at the floor. Then Troy. Then their lawyer, a man who looked like he billed by the second. They took the seats at the opposite end. For 10 seconds, nobody spoke. The silence stretched across the table like a physical barrier. I listened to the air conditioning. I watched Judith open her leather portfolio. Her hands were steady, but her knuckles were white. "Let's make this quick," Judith said. "Agreed," I said. She blinked, thrown off her rhythm. She had expected resistance, not compliance. "My lawyer has prepared a demand." She said, her voice tight. "We require the immediate reinstatement of the supply chain, a release of the exclusivity clause without penalty, and a public apology for the reputational damage you have caused." "Stop." The word wasn't loud, but it cut through the room. Judith froze. "I am not here to negotiate, Judith," I said. "I am here to talk. Then I am going to give you something. Then I am going to leave." She stared at me. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She looked at Harrison, expecting an objection, but he just sat there with his hands folded. I stood up. I didn't look at my notes. I didn't need them. "When I was 3 years old, you signed adoption papers and brought me into your home," I said. "And for 41 years I have been trying to earn a seat at your table." Judith scoffed. A sharp, dismissive sound. "We gave you a seat," she said. "We gave you a life." I kept going. "I built a company," I said. "I didn't build it to prove anything to you. I built it because I am good at what I do. But somewhere along the way, my company became your lifeline. For 13 years, I fed your empire. I solved your problems. I kept your lights on." And neither of us knew how to say that out loud. I looked at Corinne. She slid a thin file folder across the table toward Judith. "What is this?" Judith asked, not touching it. "It is a record," I said. I opened my own copy. "In 13 years of serving your restaurants, your staff received 47 late payments. There were 14 documented instances where you called my customer service line and threatened my employees. There were 6 instances where you called my delivery drivers worthless." Judith stiffened. "I am not reading this to punish you," I said quietly. "I am reading it to show you a pattern. You treat the people who keep you alive as if they don't exist. Your employees, your vendors, your adopted daughter." "That is enough," Judith snapped. "This is a business meeting. Keep your personal vendettas out of it." I pulled out my phone. "I have one more thing," I said. I tapped the screen and set the phone in the center of the table, turning the volume up. The video was from 3 years ago. The Heart of Beaufort Charity Gala. Judith was standing at a podium holding a crystal award bathed in a golden spotlight. "Adopting Bridget was the greatest act of love in my life," the Judith on the screen said. Her voice broke with perfect practiced emotion. "We saved her, but in truth, she saved us." Applause erupted from the tiny speakers. I let it play for another 5 seconds, watching the Judith in the room watch the Judith on the screen. Her face was unreadable. Stone. I turned the phone off. "That is the woman you show the world," I said. "The woman who sat in my office 2 weeks ago and told me I owed her for existing. The woman who told her friends she wished she had never signed the papers. That is the woman your family knows." Judith's hands gripped the armrests of her chair. The leather creaked. "Are you done?" she asked. Her voice was ice. "Almost." "Because I have things to say too," she said, leaning forward. You have had 41 years to say them, Judith. You used them to point me to the kitchen. I reached for the document Harrison had prepared. It was a single page. I slid it across the table. It came to a stop right in front of her hands. "What is this?" she asked. "It is a release," I said. She looked at it. She read the first paragraph. Her eyes widened. "This is a full release of the exclusivity clause," I said. "No penalty, no severance fee. Effective immediately. You can call Atlantic Foods tomorrow. You can find a new supplier. You can save the restaurants." Judith stared at the paper. She looked for the trap. She turned the page over, looking for the fine print. "What is the catch?" she whispered. "There is no catch. You aren't buying us, no." She looked up at me, genuine confusion warring with her suspicion. "Then what do you want?" she asked. "If you don't want the money and you don't want the company, what do you want?" I looked at her. I looked at the woman I had spent my entire life trying to impress. I looked at the lines around her mouth and the fear behind her eyes. "I wanted you to call me your daughter," I said. The room went completely still. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. "I wanted one Christmas at the dining room table." I continued. "I wanted you to come to my graduation. I wanted you to see my company and say, 'I am proud of you.'" I paused. "But you can't give me those things. I know that now. And I am done asking." I reached up to my right ear. I unclasped the pearl earring, then the left. I held them in my hand for a moment. They were warm. I set them on the table right next to the contract. The soft click of the pearls hitting the wood sounded like a gavel coming down. "These are the only thing I ever received from this family that meant something," I said. "Frank gave them to me when you didn't come to my graduation. He called himself Dad in a letter he wrote before he died. He was too afraid of you to say it out loud, but he wrote it down." Judith's face cracked. It wasn't a large break. It was a hairline fracture in the porcelain. Her lip trembled. Her eyes darted to the pearls. "I don't need them anymore," I said. "I know what they meant. That is enough." Judith stared at the earrings. For a second, I saw it. I saw the woman who might have existed if she hadn't been so consumed by her own image. I saw regret. Then she blinked and the wall went back up, brick by brick. "Frank was sentimental," she said. Her voice was steady again. "He always was." I waited. "You think this changes anything?" she asked, looking up at me with cold eyes. "A letter from a dead man." "It changed everything for me," I said. "You were always dramatic," she said. "You always had to make everything about you." There it was. The algorithm. Deny. Deflect. Diminish. "Mom." The voice came from beside her. Quiet. Shaking. Judith ignored her. "I gave you a home," Judith said to me. "I gave you opportunities most children only dream of. If you can't appreciate that," Mom Page slammed her hand on the table. Judith jumped. She turned to look at her golden child. What Judith snapped. Paige was trembling. Her face was flushed. She looked from Judith to me, and for the first time in 38 years, she didn't look through me. She looked at me. "She is right," Paige said. The silence that followed was heavy. "She is right, Mom." Paige repeated, her voice gaining strength. "We treated her like she wasn't ours. I did too. At my own wedding, I told her to sit in the kitchen, and I didn't even think about it. Because that is what we do. That is what we have always done." Judith turned her entire body toward Paige. She looked at her daughter with the appraiser's stare. "Don't you start," Judith warned. "I am not starting anything," Paige said. "I am saying she is right. And Dad, Frank, he knew it too. He just couldn't say it." Troy reached out and covered Paige's hand with his own. She didn't flinch. She held his gaze, then looked back at Judith. Judith looked around the table. She looked at the lawyer who was billing her by the hour. She looked at Troy. She looked at Paige. She looked at the contract that would save her empire. She stood up. She gathered her leather portfolio. She picked up the contract. She didn't pick up the pearls. She looked at me one last time. Her eyes were dry. Her chin was high. She was the queen of a kingdom that was crumbling, but she would never ever admit that the ruin was her own fault. "I don't regret adopting you," she said. "It was a transaction, a statement of fact." "That is not the same as being glad you did," I said. She turned and walked out the door. The lawyer scrambled to follow her. Paige stayed for a moment. She looked at me. "I'm sorry, Bridge," she whispered. I nodded. "Go," I said. She stood up and followed her mother. The door closed. The room was empty, except for us. Corinne let out a long, ragged breath. Harrison started packing his files. I looked at the pearls sitting on the table. After a moment, I picked them up and slipped them into my pocket. They had one last thing to do. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and garlic. It was evening. The rain had stopped and the windows were open, letting in the cool, clean air of the Carolina night. I sat at the table. It wasn't a long mahogany table. It was oak scratched from the day we moved in, with a ring stain near the center from where Corinne had set a wine glass 3 years ago. There were 4 chairs. They all matched. Wade was at the stove pulling the roasted chicken out of the oven. The skin was golden and crispy. Corinne was sitting opposite me. She had opened a bottle of Pinot Noir and was pouring it into 3 glasses. "Did she cry?" Corinne asked. "She left," I said. Corinne handed me a glass. "Good enough." Wade brought the platter to the table. He set it down in the center. He lit the candle in the middle of the table, a simple white pillar candle he lit every night, even when we were eating takeout pizza. I reached up and touched my earlobes. They were bare. For 26 years, I had worn Frank's pearls as a talisman. I had worn them to remind myself that I was loved. But they had also been a weight. They had been a reminder that the love I received was secret, hidden, something that had to be smuggled in the dark. I didn't need them anymore. Wade sat down. He looked at me. He raised his glass. "To..." He trailed off, waiting for me. "To freedom," Corinne suggested. I shook my head. Freedom felt too big, too abstract. I looked at the table. I looked at the chicken Wade had cooked. I looked at the wine Corinne had poured. I looked at the 2 people who knew exactly who I was and had never asked me to sit anywhere but right here. This table wasn't set for 100 guests. It wasn't elevated on a riser. It didn't have a velvet rope. It was mine. "Two enough," I said. We clinked glasses. The sound was bright and clear. I took a sip of wine. 3 months later, Kessler Seafood announced they had signed a new vendor agreement with Atlantic Foods. They survived. They closed 2 underperforming locations, but the chain survived. Paige texted me on Christmas Eve. "Merry Christmas, Bridge. You are welcome at our table. Not Mom's. Ours." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "Maybe next year." I donated the proceeds from the sale of Frank's pearls to a foster care advocacy group in Beaufort. They sold for $4,200. I didn't attend the auction. Tideline Coastal Distribution posted record revenue for the fiscal year. The Charlotte Business Journal named me CEO of the year. The profile mentioned my adoption. I approved the line. I never spoke to Judith Kessler again. I looked across the table at Wade. He was laughing at something Corinne said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He caught me watching him and smiled. "Pass the potatoes," he asked. I picked up the bowl. "Here," I said. And for the first time in 41 years, I was exactly where I was supposed to be.